Good morning. Welcome to another edition of the OHSU Effect. I'm Lacey Evans. So here's what we have lined up for today. At 8:35, we'll talk to Diana Gordon of OHSU's primate research team. Before that, we'll talk to a dietitian who works with people in all stages of cancer. She'll also have some diet tips that can help keep you cancer-free. But first, some alarming information. If you take antidepressants, you may be taking a drug that isn't as effective as doctors think. And this is all because of biased reporting. With me now on the OHSU Effect is Dr. Erick Turner with the Department of Psychiatry at OHSU and the Center for Ethics in Healthcare. And you're also a staff psychiatrist at the Portland VA Medical Center. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start by talking about a research paper that you wrote a couple years ago about antidepressant medications, and it got a lot of attention. Why is that?
Yes, so the antidepressants were the topic of that paper actually 4 years ago now, and the current paper is about antipsychotic medications, not antidepressants, just to clarify that. But the antidepressant paper did get a lot of attention, and primarily because it showed that what we believe to be true, based upon the medical journal articles and what doctors take as the gospel truth, at least what they've been taught to take as a gospel truth, is really not necessarily the whole truth. So we found that by reading journal articles, you would be led to believe, if you're a doctor, that basically the drugs beat placebo almost 100% of the time. They practically can't fail. But then when you look at FDA data instead, you find out that that really only happens, in other words, beating placebo or a sugar pill, only about half the time, as opposed to all the time. So there's quite a big disconnect there between what we thought was going on and what the underlying truth is. And then you can do an analysis also called using a statistical technique called meta-analysis, where you kind of put together all the studies and look at the overall effectiveness of the drug class. And the same sort of thing was borne out. You had this, as a result of what we call publication bias, you have this exaggeration of the effectiveness of the medications as opposed to what's really going on.
Do you know why this was happening?
Well, the FDA does not regulate. It does regulate what drugs get on the market, but it has no power over what gets into the published literature. And basically, when someone decides to publish a study, it's really completely voluntary as to whether they want to sweep it under the rug or whether they want to publicize it. And then when they go to write it up, you have freedom to basically play around with the data. And sometimes a negative finding where the drug doesn't beat placebo, if you use a different statistical technique, can be turned into what seems to be a positive finding, and no one's the wiser.
So why is this concerning for patients?
Well, I think it creates a sort of a Lake Wobegon effect, if you will, where Garrison Keillor says in Lake Wobegon, as you may know, where all the kids are above average. So if you have this going on with different drug classes, you might have some drug classes that are very effective and are just, indeed really are as good as they are in the published literature. And in those cases, the journal articles are giving an accurate representation of the truth. But you might have other cases where the drugs really are not, but because of publication bias, they look just as good as the drugs that are really good, and the doctor reading the medical journals can't tell the difference, and the patient is then relying upon the doctor to read the medical journals and find out the truth. But if what's in the journal articles is not really as accurate as it could be, then he or she is relying on incomplete information.
Well, and this week, the next chapter of this research was released. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was this current study is which has come out in Public Library of Science Medicine, and by the way, that's an open access journal, and anybody can get access to the full text. You don't have to have a subscription for it. So that study is about antipsychotics, and basically we found that the same sort of phenomenon is going on with publication bias, not to the same degree that we saw with antidepressants, because it seems like basically the drugs work more consistently and more reliably than antidepressants in terms of how frequently they beat the sugar pill or placebo. So, but nevertheless, there are some things going on. Some might call them shenanigans. Where, for instance, drugs beating other drugs, or the drug being studied might lose to a competing drug, but somehow that doesn't find its way into the journal article.
Do you have plans to look at this issue in other psychiatric medications?
Yeah, I would like to. I think it should be done across the board. Throughout the class of psychiatric medications, and I think for that matter, I think it needs to extend well beyond throughout medicine, not just psychiatry.
Well, that leads me to my next question. I mean, what are the chances that this same thing is occurring when it comes to heart medications or other medications?
I think it could very well be going on to some extent. We really don't know. Until this type of study is done, where an analysis is done based upon FDA reviews or some other kind of gold standard database, something more reliable than the published literature, then I think we just don't really know. It could be that the drugs are every bit as effective as they appear to be in the journal articles, and it could be that they're not anywhere close.
Do you have thoughts on how this system could be improved?
Yeah, that is a big question. There have been steps to improve it already as far as non-publication of results and sweeping entire studies under the rug. There's been laws passed, and there's one in 2007 where studies have to be registered up front before they're conducted. And so by registration, what that means is if you're wondering if a study was done, you can look it up online, and then you can say, well, what happened to it? What happened to this study? And is there a journal article for this? But that does get a little tedious. You're not going to go through and look at the thousands and tens of thousands of studies in the registry and see if they've been published or not. But if you're interested in a particular drug, you could use that database to look up all the studies that were done. So the non-publication is part of the problem. The other part is the spin problem. So in other words, what does get published has that been spun in such a way that a non-significant result has been turned into something that looks good, kind of some might say putting pig on lipstick. So that I think can be dealt with by people reviewing the articles, the journals that put these out, reviewing the study protocols. And the study protocols, what that is the plan or blueprint for the study that's written before the study is conducted. And then later, after the results are in, the reviewers can look back and say, well, what technique or how exactly did they say that they're going to analyze the data? How many patients were they planning on studying? And then if there's a discrepancy, they can say, hey, what are you trying to pull here? How come you said you're going to do it this way, but what you want to publish is this other technique? What's going on?
Well, it would be very difficult, as you mentioned, for a patient to go through all those articles online. So what should patients ask their doctors here?
I think one big question is you could a lot of this is you could sort of delegate to the FDA. The FDA is not perfect, but the FDA is charged with making sure that the drugs that are approved are safe and effective for use, and so there is a standard for they're approving, and so a big question: has the FDA approved the drug that we're talking about for this use in question? So whatever it may be, the FDA approves drugs not just globally, but they approve them for specific use. Now, if you use the drug for some other use other than what it's FDA approved for, then that's called off-label use. So a big question number one, I think, is what we're talking about here, is this an FDA-approved use or is this an off-label use? So that's one big question there. The second question would be, do you think publication bias might be affecting this drug? And if the doctor says, well, of course not, there's no evidence of that, I would that kind of defensiveness, and unless there's data to back it up, I'd be a little concerned about that, because I think that's what we used to think about antidepressants. People used to think that antidepressants beat placebo all the time, and until someone goes through and compares what's in the literature with what's, in a gold standard database, you really don't know. So I think a good answer to that would be, it in many cases it could be, but well, I think it should be acknowledged that it could be going on in most cases unless it's been specifically looked at.
Well, Dr. Erick Turner, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.